They say the jungle keeps secrets, but sometimes it gives one away when the right soul is listening. Rain hammered the jungle canopy, turning the thick green maze into a living, breathing wall of sound. Somewhere within the untamed heart of the forest, something moved, something not born of vines or claw or fang. It was a woman, crawling, blood streaked down her leg, her face pale as moonlight. Her breaths were shallow, each one a battle against the pain and terror. She had no idea where she was or if she would survive the night. She wasn't even sure if she wanted to. But fate, as wild and unrelenting as the jungle itself, had other plans. 1 week earlier, deep in the southern wilderness, where roads turned to dirt and dirt to moss, there lived a man. Some knew him as Elias Stone, the lumberjack with shoulders like tree trunks and hands worn by decades of labor. Others, fewer now, called him the Ghost of Timber Creek, a man who once had a life full of light until that light was taken. Elias had come to this jungle not for work, but to disappear. His wife, Marian, had died 5 years ago in a car accident, and since then, he couldn't bear the weight of the city, the noise, the faces that reminded him of what he lost. The forest didn't judge, the trees didn't ask questions. They just stood rooted and silent, much like him. His days passed in rhythmic silence, chopping, hauling, building, surviving. No need for clocks, no room for dreams. Until that night, the rescue, the howl of a jaguar echoed through the trees. Elias had been finishing his dinner, ice, salt, and a piece of smoked boar, when he heard it, not the jaguar, but something human. A cry, faint, desperate. He froze. His instincts warred with his grief, hardened heart. Don't get involved, one part whispered, but something inside him, a voice that sounded like Maria, nudged him forward. With nothing but his flashlight and a machete, he followed the sound. It took over an hour of slashing through wet vines and stumbling over roots before he found her. She was lying in a clearing, her leg bent at an unnatural angle, cuts down her arms, clothes torn. Her eyes fluttered open at his approach, and for a moment they locked. In those brown eyes he saw terror, confusion, and something else, hope. "My name is Elias," he said gently, crouching beside her. "You're going to be all right." Two worlds collide. Her name was Clara Hayes, a photojournalist on assignment to capture the hidden wildlife of the jungle. A freak storm had swept through the region, separating her from her guide. She'd been alone for 4 days, surviving on river water and sheer will, but a slip on a ridge had shattered her ankle. Without Elias, she would have died. She knew it. He didn't let her say it. Elias carried her back to his cabin, a modest hand-built structure nestled beside a stream. There was no electricity, no radio, no connection to the outside world, but there was safety, warmth, and in Elias there was a surprising gentleness. He splintered her leg, boiled medicinal herbs, and cooked meals with quiet dedication. At first they spoke little. Clara was in pain, Elias was cautious, but the days passed and silence gave way to stories. She spoke of her travels, her fight to make it in a male-dominated industry, her recent heartbreak. He listened. Then, eventually, he spoke of Marian, of the accident, of why he never left this place. "It's not just the trees that hold you here," she said softly one night as the fire crackled. "It's the ghosts." He didn't argue. Healing over the course of 2 weeks, something shifted. Clara's wounds began to heal, but so did something inside Elias. He found himself smiling again, laughing even, when she mimicked the grunts of a wild pig or teased him for his grumpy ways. They worked together, her on crutches, him guiding her, planting herbs, collecting rainwater, cooking together. Life, raw and simple, pulsed between them. There were no pretenses, just two people, broken in their own ways, learning how to live again. But the world outside didn't forget them. The search party, it was a distant hum at first. A helicopter, then voices calling Clara's name. A search party, finally reaching this remote part of the jungle. Clara's heart lifted. She would go home. She would see her family again. But why did her chest ache when she looked at Elias? He helped her pack, gave her a handmade satchel, stitched from banana leaves and canvas. When the search team arrived and stretchered her away, he simply nodded. No goodbye, just a silent prayer. 3 months later, back in the city, Clara's story exploded. "Woman survives jungle ordeal," read the headlines. She refused interviews. She wrote one heartfelt article titled "The Man Who Chose the Trees." published anonymously. It went viral, touching hearts around the world, but something in her heart remained unsettled. Nights were colder, without the hum of the jungle. Her photos didn't speak as they used to, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw a quiet man with weathered hands and eyes that carried 1,000 storms. The return she went back, no fanfare, no press, just a backpack and her heart in her throat. She found the cabin, barely changed. The door creaked open. Elias stood there, axe in hand, frozen. "You left something with me," she said. He blinked. "My heart," she whispered, and for the first time in years, the lonely lumberjack dropped his axe and reached for her. The jungle keeps many secrets. Some are never meant to be found. But sometimes, just sometimes, the forest doesn't hide you to punish you. It hides you to heal you. In a world too fast to notice the quiet ones, maybe it's in the silence that we find our deepest truths. And maybe, just maybe, love can still grow in the wildest places, if we're brave enough to listen. They say the jungle keeps secrets. But sometimes, when the right soul is listening, it gives one away. That single haunting line set the tone for everything that followed. It wasn't just an opening phrase. It was a whisper from fate, a foreshadowing of something extraordinary. The jungle, dense, ancient, and alive, was more than a setting. It was a character in its own right, both ruthless and redemptive. It could devour, yes, but it could also reveal, and on one storm-soaked night, it revealed something more precious than survival: connection. Elias Stone hadn't heard a human voice in over a year. Not since the last supply run, when he traded timber for salt, bullets, and fuel. Even then, he'd spoken only when necessary. The silence of the jungle had become his second skin, its patterns familiar, its sounds a lullaby he could not sleep without. But the cry he heard that night shattered that rhythm. It was faint, almost drowned by the rain and distant thunder. Most would have dismissed it, mistaking it for a howler monkey or the wind cutting through the trees. But Elias knew. It was too human, too desperate. Something in him stirred. His boots were laced in under a minute. The machete, always by the door, felt heavier than usual. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness like a blade, but the forest didn't yield easily. Each step was a gamble, roots waiting to trip, insects waiting to bite, and predators waiting for opportunity. Still, he pushed forward, guided by nothing but instinct and a voice he wasn't sure he'd actually heard. Then he saw her, crumbled at the edge of a ravine, clothes soaked, blood oozing from her ankle. She looked like the jungle itself had tried to eat her alive. But her eyes, they were still fighting. That, more than anything, made Elias move faster. She flinched when he approached, half conscious and barely able to speak. But he knelt beside her, rain streaming down his face, and said with a gentleness he hadn't used in years, "You're going to be all right." And for the first time in his long exile, he meant it. Carrying her through the forest wasn't just physically demanding, it was an emotional rebirth. Every time she moaned in pain or leaned against his chest, a piece of his icy solitude cracked. He had vowed never to let anyone close again, not after Marion, not after watching her take her last breath in the passenger seat of their wrecked car. But Clara Hayes wasn't someone you could keep at a distance. Not when she was bleeding in your arms, not when her life depended on your strength. The days that followed were both a test and a revelation. Elias's cabin, once a sanctuary of stillness, now echoed with the sound of her laughter, her frustration at being helpless, and her endless questions. She asked about his tools, the wood he chose for building, the birds that sang outside the window. At first, he gave short answers, then longer ones, and soon the stories came. Stories of his past, of the life he once had, of the woman he loved and lost. She listened with a quiet respect, never pushing, always waiting. And when she shared her own stories, of her travels, her fears, her failure to connect with anyone who didn't want something from her, it felt less like a confession and more like a bond forming between two battered souls. Elias found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, how she winced in pain but never complained, how she tried to help around the cabin, even with a crutch under her arm and bandages around her ankle. How her presence filled the space in a way that didn't suffocate but softened. He hadn't realized how empty his world had become until she brought light into it. One evening, as the fire crackled and the night insects sang, Clara looked at him and said, "The jungle didn't try to kill me, it tried to send me here." Elias didn't respond, he couldn't, but something shifted in his chest. For the first time in years, the ache didn't feel like drowning. It felt like breathing again. That single choice to leave his cabin that night and follow a sound set into motion a journey that neither of them could have predicted. It wasn't just a rescue, it was a reckoning. The jungle didn't give Elias a second chance at life. It gave him Clara, and through her, it gave him back to himself.